Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 264 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is compete every day. Our quote of the day comes to us from Michael Jordan. You have competition every day because you set such high standards for yourself that you have to go out every day and live up to that. I had a lot of fun speaking with our guest today. I had the opportunity to first record on his podcast. It is my pleasure to return the favor. Jake Thompson is a successful speaker, trainer, author, and podcaster. I know you will enjoy what he has to share with us today. Jake, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here today.
I appreciate it. So the first question I ask everybody, we've changed it over the last month or two, is are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Without a doubt.
Awesome. So the number one objective of our show is to both motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself either have a no-quit story or perhaps a really challenging time where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Yeah, I think the very first one I have to go back to, the very first thing I remember was Little League Baseball. I played first base. It was warming up for a game with my second baseman. The third baseman throws a baseball at me, hits me square in the face, knocks out my two front teeth. I play the game with blood on my jersey. But after that, I was like terrified of the baseball, like could not stand in the batter's box at that point. And I was like ready to quit, like a few games into the season, ready to quit, give up, hate baseball now, hate it. And my dad taught me one of the most important lessons I've never forgotten. And he said, you will never quit during a season. He said, we can talk about it at the end of the year, but he said, you can't quit in the end of the season. And I fought and complained and did like any kid did, but I stuck with it. And then ended up playing baseball for a number of years afterwards. And I'll never forget that moment of learning, because my dad wanted me to learn the importance of you don't quit when you're afraid. Because he knew it wasn't that I hated baseball. It was that I was afraid of getting hit by the ball. And he knew at some point later in life, if he let me quit right then I would probably do it again later in life. And there were other instances throughout sports career, throughout life, where I just wanted to give up because you feel that pit in your stomach and you just are afraid. But that's the one I go back to. Is it was kind of forced on me not to quit at such a young age, but it was the one that I think helped build some grit that I've needed throughout the rest of my journey.
That's an awesome story. And I can say that when you started it, I was kind of like, all right, where's this guy going with this funny, just short, small tidbit. I was playing first base as well. I played catcher as well, but I was in 8th grade. And the sun was just setting, and during the game, third baseman had a good arm, nothing crazy, but he fires a ball, and I see it, and all of a sudden, it just gets caught in the light. Next thing I know, I'm like tasting a little bit of blood in my mouth. Thank God it didn't hit my teeth. It hit kind of like the side over my lip, but I actually bounced off my face. I caught it. The guy was out. But literally in the dugout, the guy next to me was like, dude, he's like, look at your face. And I'm like, what? My lip was like, it was blown out. I don't know if I think it's the movie Hitch with Will Smith. You ever see when that's what I looked like. But I appreciate you touching that. You definitely brought back some memories. So you can play first base and I'll play third base.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do today.
Yeah, so I'm a professional speaker. I run a company called Compete Every Day, where I am the Chief Encouragement Officer. We're a media company that's all about reminding people life is worth competing for. And similar to yourself, it's helping equip them with the mindset, grit, resilience to keep pursuing the things in life that matter and the people they love.
Could you repeat that CEO title again for everybody?
Yeah, Chief Encouragement Officer. I was inspired, awesome. Ironically, I was inspired by the guys at Life is Good. Those guys, their stories, the Jacobs brothers, is what ultimately inspired me to go down the apparel route. And I loved how they were the chief optimism officer, and one was, I think, the chief experience officer. And I thought about it, and I was like, man, that just makes you stop and think. because especially, I mean, everybody loves to have CEO on their card, and I'm director, and I was like, what is something that'll get people just to pause? And so, yeah, Chief Encouragement Officer became it.
I think that's super, super neat the way you tied it back to life is good. And for our listeners who maybe are not familiar with that story, two guys that created a company. Initially, it was just T-shirts, I believe, right?
Yeah, with a stick figure guy named Jake on the front.
And they've taken it to a crazy level. Did you ever tell them that, you can tell listeners that Jake is actually you?
I wish I had. I wish I could tell those brothers that, hey, the stick figure guy's me. But it's made it for a pretty fun little story, especially early years in my company, because you see them in airports all the time, and I'm like, motivation, like that is motivation. You see it.
I'm gonna now tell everybody. I said, that stick figure guy, I actually know who he is. So I wanted to get your quick kind of snippet on compete every day. I think it's a super specific name in the sense of what it is, but I think it's such a cool perspective of doesn't matter where you are. It could be business, could be sports, and I just wanted to kind of get your perspective on why you actually named your company that.
Yeah, I think for me, it came after years of looking at competition in a very unhealthy manner. I was always a competitive guy in sports. I was a smaller athlete. And we know smaller athletes, less talented kids, you've got to outwork and outsmart people to play. You've got to have that attitude. Malcolm Gladwell calls it the theory of compensation. You've got to compensate for the skills you lack. And for me, I spent years trying to compete against everyone else, comparing myself to everyone else till I was burnt out. And you're just defeated. And once I started shifting my perspective a little bit, and this idea of competing every day against myself, how was I going to show up today and be better than I was yesterday? How was I going to learn to block out everyone else and what everyone else is doing so I could focus on my lane, run my race, and do better every single day? That's ultimately what started down the path of creating the brand and really wanting to challenge people with the idea of competition. It's not me versus you. We may be going after the same goal, but ultimately it comes down to what I do with what's in my control every day instead of making excuses or being distracted by everything outside of my control. And so at its core, compete every day is just about showing up, doing better than you had the day before, and competing against your own self to be your best. And more than that, discover what you're actually capable of.
I love that. I know you're a sports guy as well, and I had the fortune of having the former Orlando Magic GM Pat Williams on my show, and he's written a ton of books, and he's been very influential in not only basketball but baseball as well. But he has a quote, and I won't quote it, but perspective he shared with me, and also a lot with people he does with businesses and individuals is, competition should bring out your best, and I think people don't fully understand that. And to your point, the first person you should compete against, the most important, I believe, is yourself, trying to be the best version of yourself. And obviously in business and life and sports, ultimately you compete against other people, but there's ways to do it. And I love how you shared that. And I think it's super important for people to take from that as well.
Well, and the thing you just said hit the nail on the head. Like, the first person should be yourself, and it brings out the best in us. That's the one thing I love. Like, you would think you and I play in the same space. We're both speakers. We both have books. We both speak to audiences, real estate, other organizations. But in my belief, and very much in yours, a rising tide raises all ships. The better you do, the better I'm challenged to raise my game, because we want to be able to weed out the people that are not providing value, that are not having their audience's best interest at heart. And what I go back to is we're recording this right now in mid-May. Last week, maybe this week, the big mountain man set the world deadlift record.
Yeah.
In his garage.
Crazy.
And the former world champion was like, oh no, I'm going to beat that. And he came out saying, like, I'm going to top this. If he did it in his garage, I can. And what I loved about it is, like, that's the beauty of competition. It's not like I'm going to beat myself up because you did that. It's like, you did that. Awesome. I'm going to see if I can raise the bar again.
It's interesting. I know you're a Texas guy, and Zig Ziglar was a mentor of mine, and I had the fortune of having his son Tom on the show. But Zig talked about all the time is it's not rooting against somebody, it's rooting for somebody, and it's okay to be competitive, and it's okay to say to somebody else, hey, that guy beat me today, or they were better today. And it doesn't have to be anti that person and anti, but the story you just shared about the weightlifting record, I think was awesome, because I'd seen a bunch of tweets and things, and we probably follow some interesting people. I'm actually going to ask a question I usually wait till the end, but it's interesting because the way where you went with that answer is, I was curious if there's somebody or maybe a couple of people that you follow on social media that just have a really positive message that maybe you could recommend to our listeners.
Yeah, I think one that they've probably already learned a little bit from you, because we talked about him quite a bit before, was John Gordon. I love John Gordon's approach, his attitude, his message is fantastic. John Acuff is another one who John's own story as an author and speaker is fantastic, and he's got a very positive but authentic sense that he shares and the content he shares. So those are two guys that I absolutely love how they approach it. And then I would say throw another one in there is Coach Dar, who's Darlene Santor out of Phoenix. She's kind of a life coach, positive, very optimistic, works with the Phoenix Suns, a number of organizations out there. But Coach Dar is a great follow. So if you follow, John and Coach Dar, man, you're going to be in for some positivity on your feed.
I love it. I think in today's day and age, not only during this coronavirus and this pandemic right now, but in general, and we talked about it before, and I had the privilege of interviewing on your show, is, we're going to get through this. There's no doubt in my mind. The question is whether it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and how it looks for the first little bit. But the reality is we're going to get through this. So fast forward a year from now when this podcast comes out, we're still going to need that positivity. So I'm glad you shared that. And I have not followed Coach Dar. I know the other two Johns, so thank you. I get to learn as well. So question we ask is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Encourager.
I love it. I think the short time I've known you, and it's definitely something I would say for you. So you have a new book coming out. I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners not only a little bit about the book, but most importantly, how can they follow it and get their own copy?
Yeah, so the book is called Compete Every Day, the not so secret to winning your work in life. It's a lot of the content that I know you talk about here on the show that we believe of how sports and life mirror each other, and how I made such a mistake for the majority of my life, waiting on success to fall in my lap, waiting on opportunities to come to me, someone to rescue me, when in reality, what I needed to do is take responsibility for my own life and focus on these 7 key choices that I outline in the book that are all 100% in our control. It's a short read. Every chapter has takeaways at the end that you can immediately implement in your career, in your health and fitness, and in your life. Just for something, if you read through it, you've got something you can apply. And every copy, you can grab a paperback version right now at competeeveryday.com. A Kindle and audiobook are coming on Amazon, so both will be available for pre-order on Amazon.
That's awesome. So follow-up question to that is, we'd love to add value to our listeners, and not only being an author yourself, but I wanted to ask if you've read anything recently, or perhaps you're currently reading something that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Yeah, so I think the book that I recommend everyone is Mindset by Carol Dweck. If you haven't talked about it here on the show, if someone else hasn't mentioned it, I've got to be the first. I love it. It and Atomic Habits were 2 of the best reads I've had in the last few years. And I say mindset because it's one you read that you immediately start identifying points in your life when you had a fixed mindset, and now you realize why you acted a certain way. Like, it's a helpful read in terms of raising your self-awareness, which is, as we know, self-awareness is the key to success and growth, because you've got to be aware of where you struggle, where your strengths are. And so mindset is a really big one that I highly, highly recommend for people to invest time in.
Two great books, and ironically, one of them is Mindset is sitting on literally behind me. You can't see right now. And I actually have gifted 2 copies of Atomic Habits to people. One actually a very successful college basketball coach. So wanted to get your answer to this, and I'm curious. But over the last year or so, in regards to books and things, a lot of people have spoken about how every single year they reread a certain book, or they typically read a book every quarter, or the first of the year, and I never really understood it. And then people were explaining is every time you read it, you get something different. And wanted to just get your perspective. Is there a book or 2 that you continually reread?
Yeah, I'm about every 2 years for the books I reread. I give it enough space. One is Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. That was a game changer in terms of my business. I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi was a huge game changer in my personal finance. And even after reading it a couple of times, you reread it and you're like, I need to still do this better, because at the time you're not quite ready to make that move. And then the third one for me is The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And that one I probably go back to even more frequently than Profit First or I Will Teach You to Be Rich, because it's all about focus. And it just is a continual reminder to cleave away all the busy work to focus on what moves the needle.
I love it. So we discussed the morning routines, and I think it's an interesting question. And one thing that I've realized sharing with our listeners is there is not one size fits all. And one of the things I absolutely love about hosting this show is, as you can see, because we're on video, even though it comes out just audio, I take a ton of notes during the show. And I wanted to see if you have a morning routine or a daily routine that you swear by.
Yeah, so ever since we've been on quarantine with COVID, I've been experimenting actually with my routine. Because it's very easy, like you, when we travel all the time, sometimes that routine changes because you're getting on flights and whatnot. And so what I've done is try to figure out what has worked really well for me. And what I'm starting to see that works really well is if the first thing in the morning I just get moving. Used to it would be going to the gym, but while I've been under quarantine, it's honestly just been throwing on a weight vest and going for about a 1 to 2 mile walk with an audiobook, something positive I'm putting into me. Then I'm grabbing some coffee. I'm doing a little bit of our admin stuff. I'm reviewing my 3 important tasks for the day, and then I'm go. And so that's kind of where I find it, because I get the reflection, I get the learning on the walk, I get the movement to get my blood flow going, and I feel like it really sets my mind in the right focus and attitude to really attack the day, versus the days where I just get up and I start working, or I grab the coffee and I'm out the door. That never seems to be as productive as a day for me.
No, that's super important. And I had a guest on a couple weeks ago that spoke about how he had a 2-hour morning routine. But what happens obviously in life and kids and all those things is that you don't have those 2 hours. But he was super specific, saying that if I only have 15 minutes, I want to control those 15 minutes, because how you start your day, I believe, is how you give yourself a better opportunity, a better chance of winning the day. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Can I also say, just on that, listeners, it's okay to have seasons with your morning routine. Like, it's okay to change it seasonally, because when I was writing my book, my priority that day was getting the book. And so what I did is I wrote 500 words every day before I did anything else. And so I would get up, get my coffee, roll or stretch out in my room, and then write. And then I would go do the walk and other things. But I did that for the 3 to 4 month period. And then you shift 3 to 4 months of, hey, I'm traveling every week. So how can I best make sure I'm resting and controlling? So don't be afraid to experiment, and also don't be afraid to change every few months if you need something that best serves where you're trying to go.
I think that's really, really key is don't be afraid to experiment and change. And that's one of the things why I love that question is it's not a yes or no answer. I could never say to you, just like you could never say to me, okay, Chris, this is the magical morning routine. And you have to do it for 3 hours. And I said, well, I have kids and I do this. And be like, nope, you have to do it. And some people have specific to 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but I'm glad you touched on that. So I have to ask you a personal question here.
Yeah.
Is meditation a part of your daily routine at all?
I would say yes, probably not in the sense of sitting like a lot of people think from a stereotypical standpoint of sitting and just type meditation. For me, it's reflection and gratitude. It's quiet time, it's prayer. Sometimes that's walking and just listening to nothing but nature and reflecting on it. I do that. And I also will try to do it throughout the day, especially if I have days where I'm dealing with anxiety or my ADHD is really struggle from a focus. Creating that space where I just focus on breathing and creating that time to control my mind, control it, even if it's for 60 seconds, is big. And it didn't start that way. For me, it was using the app Headspace, and like we got to start at 15 seconds. Just 15 seconds controlling your thoughts, controlling your breath, and then you build up from there. I think a lot of times, especially those of us that maybe come from more conservative upbringings or areas, you hear meditation and you have a very distorted view of what it could look like. And I think finding it what works for you, but it's all about the gratitude and controlling your thoughts, your breathing in that moment, being able to control what goes in your mind and also what's coming out.
I love it. No, and I think that's important. And I'm glad you touched on that, because I think the meditation perspective is something that I've struggled with, and the way you just described it is where I struggled. It was kind of similar to how you described competition and the way you thought about it is I had this maybe phobia where I had to sit down and grab a small carpet or a pillow and just put my hands out and close my eyes for an hour. And I've never been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, but I can tell you by definition, I think I have it times like 20. So the fact that you said 20 seconds, I think I could absolutely just kill a 15 or 20 second meditation routine.
Yeah, and it's like anything. Start small. We fail when we take too big of chunks instead of just building in little tweaks that eventually create our massive successes over time. We just get in too much of a rush of like, well, I've got to meditate for 30 minutes. No, 15 seconds. Start with something you can do.
It's so ironic that you just said that. I share that all the time is small wins lead to huge victories. And I think it's something that we talked on your show, but no championship was ever lost or won in the first quarter of a game, the first inning of a season. It's those small wins, the first win, the first home win, the first road win, the first playoff series, and all of a sudden you add up those 25, 30, 50 wins, and now you're doing some serious stuff. So if you could go back to the 20-year-old version of yourself and give yourself just one piece of advice, what would it be?
Man, quit waiting and start doing. I think I was still in the early 20. You're still waiting on something better down the road. You're waiting on a magic tipping point. You're waiting on something to come your way instead of just focusing on the day's process and getting better.
I love it. Great advice. So if I magically had the ability to grant you dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would you pick?
I think by watching The Last Dance, I would have to say Jordan.
Oh.
Have a cigar and a whiskey and a steak with Jordan. I'm fascinated by it, especially getting more of this personality look at him is one. And number two, I have to say probably Mark Cuban, just from a business and sports conversation.
I'm a huge fan of the show Shark Tank, and I'm a big fan of Mark. But I'll tell you, if there's a way to get that dinner with Jordan, I will be the busboy, the waiter, the clean carpet guy. I mean, you name it, I'll be there just to listen. I'm a huge Jordan fan, and I think to your point of having watched this Last Dance, I think for me and a lot of people in my circle, it solidified his greatness just because of his willingness to be the best at everything he does.
Well, and not only that, like you saw, he cared about winning. And the one example that I loved in it is when he's on the minutes restriction in year 2.
Oh, yeah.
And they pull him with 20 seconds left in the game. And he's like, are you kidding me? But if you watch it, as soon as his teammate hits the game winner, Jordan is rushing the court to hug him and celebrate. Like, that is a guy that loves to win versus I didn't get to take the shot.
Exactly. No, that's super important that you touch on that, because I think that's the difference of good versus great versus the best. And I think that's one thing that Jordan had. So we're going to change lanes here to what we call our hot seat questions. And the only request we have of you is you just spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
All right.
You have a last meal. You can pick absolutely anything. What do you choose?
Homemade chocolate chip cookies from my mama.
Favorite smell?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I would have to say the homemade chocolate chip cookies fresh out of the oven again. You can tell where my mind's at right now.
I'm telling you right now, I'm hungry, but now I really want homemade chocolate chip cookies. Favorite sport?
Football.
Favorite team?
I'm a Panthers guy and NFL, but I've got to go with my college, my TCU Horned Frogs.
All right. All-time favorite movie?
Ooh, The Dark Knight.
Favorite quote?
And I'm going to butcher it. It's a Zig Ziglar quote.
Yes.
The key to success is helping other people achieve their success. And I messed that up, but that's essentially the gist of it.
If you search Zig Ziglar and his quotes, there are literally like 20 versions of each one. So
I know.
I'm going to say you're 100% right.
Okay, there we go.
Favorite book?
The one that changed my life, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years.
Ooh,
by Donald Miller.
I've never read that one. Favorite singer, group, or band?
Small group from South Carolina called Need to Breathe.
If you were in a foxhole and you could only pick one person to have your back, who would it be?
Jocko.
Ooh. So I'm tied. So every now and then people will ask me either during the show or offline, and I have a couple. It's David Goggins, Marcus Luttrell, But I also throw this one out there, and people laugh. But MacGyver, I mean, that dude could literally, he could like, take some dirt and turn it into a bomb. And
that's
so
right.
I'm gonna say if and you add Jocko to that, I think that we'd be in some pretty good hands.
I think so.
So for our listeners who want to connect with you and follow you, what's the best way to do so? And are you active on social media?
Yeah, so very active on social. Instagram is where I love to play the most, similar to yourself. My Instagram handle is Jake Thompson Speaks. But then our company, Compete Every Day, that is the username. We are Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, we're there. And I still manage those accounts. So if you say hi to either one, we'll say hi back. And then competeeveryday.com is the best place to check out, learn more. And anyone wants to, based on anything we talked about today, you have a follow-up question, you're curious about something I said, you can always email me direct, jake@competeeveryday.com. Would love to connect, hear that you learned about it on the show, say hi, and help any way I can.
That's awesome. I'm gonna test that, and I'm gonna send DMs to both of those and see if you actually respond.
Let's go.
So last question I ask everybody is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Yeah, the biggest one would be don't believe the lie that success is quick or easy, and don't quit when it gets difficult. Keep competing until you get that victory that's most important to you.
I love it. I think perfect words to end today's episode, and I'm so glad that we got to do this. As I said, I had the privilege of being on your show, and I'm super glad that you returned the favor, and I know that we will connect again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode number 264. As the Chief Encouragement Officer, Jake is all about encouraging others. I love how Jake spoke about competing every day and that the number one person you should compete against is yourself. I couldn't agree more. In his parting words, Jake shared how it is important not to believe the lie that success is going to be quick and easy. The people and companies that I admire and look up to are the ones that worked hard and stuck it out even when things were extremely difficult. I challenge you to keep going. And remember that hard work is the secret to success. And lastly, remember that we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.